In part 2 of how to change the automatic transmission fluid in an Aston Martin DB9, I'll show you how to drain this out so you can replace it with this. In this episode of Aston1936.com, we're going to continue the process of changing the automatic transmission fluid. In part 1 of the video, I showed you why you need to change the fluid, what parts you might need, what tools you might need, and a few of the preparation steps. In this video, I'm going to show you how to get the fluid drained and how to get the seals out. So let's get started. So the first step is we need to remove this frame cross member. It's a 16 millimeter. Now, mine are pretty rusty, even though I'm in California, so I can imagine these are in pretty rough shape all over the world. I hit them with a little WD-40, and I'm using a 6-point half-inch drive socket so that I don't round them off, and then break them loose. Then I'm going to switch over and just use there we go. So there's the cross member removed, and now we have access to the bottom of the oil pan. So let's take a look at getting this heat shield off next. The next step's a bit tricky. We're going to try to take this heat shield off. It's held on with two 10 millimeter bolts. One's not too bad to get to, the other one's kind of a blind feel. So I have a 10 millimeter box end and a 10 millimeter ratcheting box end with a flexi bend. This might be the ticket. So this rearward one is pretty much a blind deal. You have to reach your arm in from over here on the opposite side of the suspension and feel your way onto the head of the bolt. There we go. Now I'm going to try to get my hand in. Somehow I have to hold the head of the wrench on the head. And it's going. It's not very tight. It's actually finger loose. Well, thankful for that. It wasn't rusted in there. And there's our first heat shield bolt. And the second one is a little bit easier, I think. It can be had from this angle. And there, I think it's finger loose. If I can only get my finger to it. So I'm hoping with this bolt removed, I'll be able to wrangle the shield out of there. There we go. Just like the other one. And there we go. One heat shield. I like to keep the bolts with the part. Yeah, so if you're lying on the ground and working, you can probably do this without pulling the right-hand exhaust pipe out. All right, well, I took out the right-hand exhaust pipe, so you'll actually be able to see more closely what you're going to be doing in a very tight space. You'll be able to see it clearly here. So we have more or less 3 tasks to accomplish on the side of the transmission here. The first, though, we're going to do is we're going to get this. This is the emergency parking override lever. Basically, if you pull the emergency parking override cable behind the left-hand rear seat because your battery's dead, this basically shifts the transmission out of park and into neutral. And because right now, if I try to turn the wheels, they're locked. And if I pull this lever vertical, I can now turn the wheels. So basically that's the parking lock release. But for later on inside, we're going to need to have that locked. So I'm going to do a trick here with 2 zip ties. And I'm going to try and, we want to have it upright. So I'm going to tuck the first zip tie in to the hole. And I've got some 8-inch zip ties. I'm going to bring the end of that one around the back of the bracket here. And then I'm going to take another zip tie and tuck it into the head till it just engages. And I'm going to link it across the back of the bracket here. And then now I have it anchored, and I can just pull it until I have it upright. So that's a pretty easy and inexpensive way to, if you had a piece of wire, you could do the same thing. I happen to have zip ties around, so that works really well. So the next thing we're going to need to undo is the electronics coupler. So basically this is how the all the electronics get linked into the inside of the transmission. It's up here, and I'd like to point out this is notorious for leaking. If you look down along the side of the transmission here, there's oil leak, there's oil here, there's been some oil blowback onto the rear differential, and it's all coming from this O-ring, the O-rings on this thing here. So we have to start by getting it uncoupled, and there's a little flange on it here, so you can really, even though you'll just be getting your hand up here barely, you just have to flip this up, and it slides back on its own as you're doing that, and then just wiggle it out of the way. And out it comes. So that's pretty easy. So next up, I want to start draining the fluid out of the transmission sump. But you can see here I've got a tray liner that you would have potentially on the garage floor. I've got some pig mat. This is incredibly absorbent cloth. There is no way you're not going to make a mess, so you're going to want to have this. I've got a graduated bucket here that shows me how many liters I get out. Because remember, I'm hoping to get close to 10 liters combined out of everything, if I can. But I want to see how much comes out of just the pan itself. I've heard it's 4 or 5 liters. How much comes out of the Mechatronics? We'll measure it at each step. So the first step, though, is we're going to pull the fill plug. Why? Don't drain the fluid until you know you can put it back. If this plug does not come out for some reason, do not continue your process draining the transmission, because you will have no way to put the fluid back in. So it's always good to take the plug out first. We're already probably at how many liters? 1. We're past the 1, we're at the 1.5. Because man, we are now crossing the 2.5 liters just by pulling the drain plug. Fill plug. We'll just let that drain out. All right, it's been a couple of minutes, and if I didn't mention, this was an 8mm hex bolt to get the fill plug out. So I'm going to put the fill plug back in now that it's slowed to essentially a drizzle, because we'll get the rest obviously when we pull the actual drain plug out. All right, so let's move the bucket over, and underneath the actual drain plug we got about just a little shy of 3 liters pulling that. And I can tell you already, if you're just even looking at the side of this, this fluid is not clean. It's not burnt, but it's, you know, got some, what you'd expect for something that's been 15 years in use. So this is a 10 millimeter hex, and yeah, now the sump on a DB9, this is all plastic, including this drain plug. So this is another step where you can expect to get fairly dirty. And we'll let that drain out completely over the next 5 or 10 minutes here, and we'll come back. I know we're basically at the 4.5 liter mark so far. All right, so the dripping is pretty much come to a halt. We are at 4.5 liters of fluid came out. So this is the big mistake. If all you do is pull the drain plug to get the fluid out, you've got 4.5 out of 10.2 liters. You're not even changing half the fluid. So I would argue that that's not the right way to do this, and that I'm going to show you how to get at a few more liters of the fluid. If you did this, you know, I suppose you could do this a couple of times if you drain it, refill it, run for, you know, an hour, come back, drain it, refill it again. You know, you replace half of the half and you replace half of the half. You could do it that way. But I'm going to try to do a flush. So this is a drain and fill, is what people kind of call this, and you only get about half the fluid. But I'm going to show you how to do a transfusion where we're actually going to circulate fresh fluid into the system using the pump itself. All right, so I want to stop the drip while I'm working or taking the rest of the pan off. Now this has a torque spec, but since we're throwing this thing away, because it's a one-time use, I don't really care. So the torque spec actually is embossed on the plastic. So, all right, drips over here stopped, drips over here stopped. So let's get on and try and take off the thermostatic control valve pipes. So next I want to deal with the thermostatic valve here. Just a refresher, I actually drew on pipes, so which way the fluid flows. So basically the fluid comes out of the engine under pressure on this pipe and then gets to here. This valve opens somewhere around 175 degrees Fahrenheit. And once the fluid is that hot, we'll let it go this way up to the cooler, comes back from the cooler, crosses back into the transmission. If this valve is not open, because it's less than 175 degrees, the fluid temperature, the fluid will basically just be rerouting back in. So, but what I'm after is releasing the 1.6 liters of fluid that should be waiting on this side. I've emptied the bucket, so I can measure how much we get here. And these fittings are 22 millimeter. And they're not super tight because there's actually these are flared fittings. These are hydraulic fittings. There's an O-ring in there. So I don't know how messy this is going to be, but basically you can crack them loose. All right, so all the unions are undone. Now I have to hope that there's enough slack that I can get these pipes to pull back. And it's very likely they might not. Now, I gave it a little bit of a tug on the transmission side. They're starting to weep, but on the other side there, not so much. The thermostatic valve is held on with 2 bolts, an 8mm here and a 10mm that's up in behind here. So I'm going to pull those off just to see if that adds any flexibility to the system. First, we'll go after the 8mm. And then the 10mm. Oh, it's loose now, starting to drool out of the connections. There we go. So we'll let that drain for a while and see what we get. We can probably stop and get some pics. It's been a few minutes and it's dripped its way down. We basically have just a hint over 1 liter in the bucket, so there's probably still about ½ liter trapped up in the cooler itself. But I want to get the thermostat body out of here now, and I think if I just pull a little bit, I can get this to come down, and then I can come the other way off the hoses. So, you know, you can see inside the thermostatic valve a little bit. That's basically a set of plungers that move side to side. You can see the O-rings on the ends of these pipes, which are very important. That's what really creates the seal. So anyways, this is out. That was the step. And I'm going to start cleaning these up. A top tip, since these things are dripping, what you could do to deal with that is you can put a glove, you know, in here and squash it up to catch basically the dribbles that are still going to keep coming. So simple low-tech solution for the messy piping. So now we've got the thermostatic valve removed, and that's a good thing because it'll allow us to get to the back bolts on the pan. We'll be able to get at everything we need to now. So it's time to pull all the 23 bolts or 21 bolts that are on here off. Now ZF actually has a guide, and they tell you, and I'll put a link to this on the website, but basically there's a pattern they want you to undo the bolts in sort of a spiral pattern so they don't warp the pan. I'm not that concerned with this pan because they make 2 versions of the pan, a plastic pan like all the Astons are fitted with, and then a steel pan. The steel pans get reused, so you don't want to warp them. The plastic pans are one-time use only and need to be replaced. So I'm not worried about warping this pan, unbolting it because we're throwing it away. But I'm going to undo it generally in the same pattern that they have. And let's get on with it in time lapse. Oh, it's a T40 Torx. So with anything like this, I always recommend that you crack them loose first, just to make sure by hand, so you don't have any that are stuck or stripping before you use a power tool. So you're going to see me switch over here to use my power tool next, just to make it go faster. All right, so I just have 2 left to go. And that would be my arm getting a nice serious shower of what's left in the pan. A little bit hit the floor, not too bad. You're not going to get a day where you stay clean. All right, but that's why I wanted to have this doggy tray, you know, essentially here. I'll basically carefully drain this all off into a bucket to see how many more liters we get. But this is an interesting moment. We do have a clear view now of the valve body unit. This is called the Mechatronic, and we're going to be pulling this down next to get to some of the seals that are underneath. We're also going to be using this white lever here to release the electronic sleeve coupling. So we're into the heart of the beast now. Time to clean up a bit. So while that's all dripping loose, the next thing we need to do is remove the Mechatronic sleeve, and that is the thing that was leaking. So before we can remove the sleeve, we have to release it, and that's this white tab on the back corner. You can see there's this little white nubbin on here. We're going to push that in, hold it in, and then pull down on the tab. So push in, pull down. And that is all that holds the locks the sleeve into place. So now if we move the light around, we can look up here. We see here's our electronic sleeve. I've pulled the wiring harness out of the way. And it should just be free to come out. And mine was super easy. And I think it's because those O-rings are completely perished and gone flat. That's why I've got a leak, is those original O-rings in there don't have any spring left to them. So this part's going to get replaced. And just going to give it a little clean up there. But there shouldn't be any oil drooling out of it. And for now, I'm going to put the white tab back up, if it'll go. I guess it doesn't go if the thing isn't there, so we'll leave it down. Just didn't want to break it off. So our next task is going to be to remove the Mechatronics, and I'll show you how to do that next. All right, well, it's time to take our Mechatronics down. The electronic sleeve is released. There are 2 bolt patterns on the Mechatronics. So and again, I'll link to this in the blog article, but basically you may have either a 7-bolt version or a 10-bolt version. Actually, sorry, a 10-bolt version or a 13-bolt version. I forgot. There's 9, 10, and 8 over here on the end to undo. So you'll compare, but basically it's all the T40 bolts. So if we look up here, there's some bigger ones that are sort of square shoulder, and then there's these little babier ones that aren't T40. So we're going to undo them, but they want us absolutely to tighten them up or loosen them off in the pattern that they've drawn out here. So I'm going to start with number 10, and then 9, 8, 7, you know, and you get it from there. We should be getting to where it gets messy. I'm going to take my electric tool out. I don't want to drown my wrench. So this unit has some weight to it, and there's going to be a bunch of fluid that comes down And that is a Mechatronics unit, lowered away. Now you're really looking at the gubbins. What we're looking up here now is at the planetary gear sets, the clutch plates. And the whole reason we're doing this is to get to this seal and these 4 seals where the rubber is probably perished. You can see the park brake pawl lever goes across, and that was something we were working on. So there's nothing electronic in there now. Basically, it's all in this Mechatronics unit. And there's a stream of fluid coming. It's probably from the pump body. And I'm going to have to pay attention to my fluid. So what I'm going to do next is going to get this turned over so that all the oil that's pooled up in here can drain down onto the pan. Here, the electronic connector is going to hold it up. And let's let that drain out for a while. All right, well now I'm interested in going after getting the, flushing out the last of the fluid out of the transmission oil cooler lines and the radiator itself out front. So this line is the towards the radiator, this line is the back from. Now if we're gonna flush, they want us to actually go reverse. So we wanna put compressed air in the outline so that it comes back through the fill line. And here's my little contraption. I have a right angle 3/8 plastic hose barb on a piece of 1/2 inch ID hose. I added a little electrical tape to make the fitting a little tighter. But how do you keep it stuck in the hole? Well, here's my trick. I'm going to use 2 more zip ties, king of the zip tie. And I'm going to use one behind the nut. And before I tighten this all the way, I'm going to put a second one in here that I'm going to use to clamp around the right angle. So this will be my anchor point now. And I'm going to push this in. Friction fit. Just going to get the clamp started. And everything's just a little bit slippery. But you can see the idea here now. Hopefully I didn't just get that on the lens. And I should really have that in the bucket. So, one clamp as the anchor point, the other zip tie holding the fitting in. And it's not going to be under significant pressure, so it's just there to turn the fluid and splash it into the bucket. And I need to kind of walk through the scene here. So now I have my compressed air. I had to add a little electrical tape to the end of my nozzle so it fit just right into the hose. And your chances, I'm going to keep one hand sort of on here just as a backup. And you don't want to put a lot of pressure in. You just want just enough to get the fluid moving. So I'm pulling the trigger really gently. That's a nice frothy. So I don't think there's much point into going for every last drip that's going to come out. Now, to be fair, I've already done a test of this rig. So when I did it the first time, I got more than that out. And if we go look at the amount of fluid that's sitting in the bucket now, this bucket was at, I think, just over 3 liters before. And we're at 3.5 now. That's basically all I was shooting for, because remember when I pulled the thermostat valve body off, we got about 1 liter out. So we're supposed to have 1.6 in the pipes. We've now got about 1.5 out of the pipes. I'm good with that. So that, I think, is the last of the draining process. So now we're going to remove the actual seals. We need a small screwdriver, maybe a pair of pliers. Basically, these four seals here have to come out. They're tubes that are stuck up in here. And on various other videos, I found that you can sometimes get them to start by putting that in and prying it a little bit and then tugging it out. So that's one of the short ones. And when you're doing this, you need to be super careful you do not scratch anything. So I'm just using the screwdriver to get them started. And then I can just get on it. And that's another one. So basically short, short. This one should be medium. And you can sort of tell by this amount of the case there. This one's a little longer and this one's even longer. So I bet you this will be the medium. Now, when you pry yours out, you're going to probably see them start. They'll be completely flush because they've been crushed. To be truthful here, when I started, I had to make sure I could do this scene, so I pulled them out already once, so that's a medium. And then we just have the longest one, so this should be the hardest one if you're doing it. So a little bit of fluid coming still. All right. And there we go. That's the long one out. So there's one more seal to go, which is the Mechatronic bridge seal. This one doesn't need any tools at all. It's not going to have any oil. It's just going to pull down. And this is actually one of the culprits for bad shifting. Basically, this gets brittle, and if this lip on either side starts to leak, essentially this is the pressure going into the system, and if this starts to leak at all, you'll get crappy shifting. So anyways, that's easy to get out. And so now we've got our two smalls, a medium and a large, and Mechatronic bridge seal removed. We've got our electronic sleeve removed. So that's all the old bits out. Now it's time to clean it up a little bit and start getting ready to reassemble. So I thought let's take a look at, now that everything's been removed from the car, just to look at the condition of a few things. First thing is, if we can get some light in the bucket here, is this oil is black. I mean, it's not clean anyways. It shows, you know, dirt, and it's doing its job right. That's exactly what the fluid's supposed to be doing, is picking up contaminants and carrying them away. But this is ready to be changed. So the new fluid, if we looked in a pail like this, and we will in a few minutes, is basically just going to be like a pale yellow. So definitely fluid's been doing its job and it's dirty. Another thing we wanted to look at was the magnets. And these are basically built in to the pan. So the material that's on my finger now, that's probably a really fine metal powder. Basically any little metal that's in the fluid will stick to these, and that's what their whole purpose is. But you're looking for chunks, and there's nothing but a really fine coating of material on there. So that's normal. While we're in here again looking, this flat plate here is the oil filter, and this is the filler neck for it. So basically fluid lands in here, gets slurped in and sucked up into the pump through this filler neck. And so this is the spent filter. It's integral with the plastic pan and the magnets, so all this gets replaced. Our Mechatronics unit, I'm really not going to do anything to clean this up. There's a little bit of the old oil residue on it, no big deal. I don't want to risk getting cleaners or anything into any of this at all. So I'm going to just leave it as is, with one exception as I assemble it. This is our electronics connector, I'm going to use some electronic terminal cleaner and give those a spritz just to make sure that they're completely free of any goop or oil. And that's the part where the electrical plug will go in on the outside. And so I'm just going to make sure those are still clean, because as this has been flipping around, a drip of fluid may have got onto them or something like that. So over here we've got the old stuff and the new stuff. Couple of things. Basically, you can see this is an actual ZF part. It's even got branded 6HP26 on it. This is the new, that's the old seal. They're slightly different looking and design a little bit, but ZF knows what they're doing, so this is the current new seal. Here's the old ones, and the new ones are just a skosh longer, which is what they should look like, because they're going to compress into the holes. So 2 shorts, a medium, and a long. And then the electronic sleeve, this one has black O-rings. You can see the O-rings have a nice bulge on them. On this old one, the O-rings are flat as a pancake, and that's why it's weeping. So I've taken all the fluid that's dripped out of the cooler and the transmission and the Mechatronics, and I've been collecting it and putting it in this 10 quart bucket, 10 liter bucket. And basically it's 10 liters if you get it right to the top lip, and we are about 1 centimeter below the top of that. So I'd estimate we have about 9.5 liters that came out. And this demonstrates my concept of, if you just pull the drain plug and refill it, remember we only got about 4.5 liters. So you'll get twice the amount of fluid if you take the time to pull it all apart and do it this way. So I think this is a success. It's supposed to be somewhere between 10 and 12 liters. I suspect that the last 2 liters is in the bottom of the torque converter, which will not drain out. So this is pretty good. So 10 liters out, let's start getting it put back together, put some more fluid back in. With the fluid drained and the seals removed, we can get on with replacing the seals and refilling the fluid, which I'll show you how to do in part 3 of this video. You'll find a link to that up here. And as always, you can find the companion blog article down here, which will have detailed instructions on all the disassembly steps that we covered in this video. Please subscribe if you'd like to get videos like this from us, as I publish them from time to time. And as always, I'd love to hear your comments. Please leave those down below.